Okay, this is a speech about the People's Republic of China. It's about a region of China, a province called Xinjiang in the northwest. You don't have to start interpreting now, I'll just give you some vocab. So I'll be talking about Xi Jinping, the president of China. I'll be talking about Xinjiang, the region. I'll be talking about the native inhabitants of the Xinjiang region, the Uygurs, in opposition to the Han Chinese. That's the Chinese people we think of when we think of China. And I'll be talking about Human Rights Watch. And I'll begin now. Ladies and gentlemen, some of you may be aware that a grave crisis, a human rights crisis, is currently underway in the People's Republic of China. Specifically, the crisis is taking place in Xinjiang, China's westernmost province. And to understand what is going on, we have to look at a little bit of recent history. You'll all remember that the Berlin Wall fell in 1989. 2 years later, in 1991, the USSR fell in turn. Now, at the time, the USSR had had a number of federal republics, the Stan countries, think of Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, and so on and so forth. And as it turns out, this region of China that I mentioned, Xinjiang, has an alternative name, East Turkestan. So when the USSR fell in 1991, the Chinese government feared that Xinjiang would in turn secede from the People's Republic. Why was this likely? Well, the population of Xinjiang traditionally has been made up of the Uyghur people. They're a different ethnicity from the Han Chinese. They practice moderate Islam. Some of the women wear hijab. They don't drink alcohol. They eat halal food. So they're rather different. Their language, also called Uyghur, is written using the Arabic script, for instance, though Mandarin is taught in schools. So from 1991, the Chinese government began to send Han officials out to Xinjiang to crack down on the population and ensure that they knew who was in charge. The result is that currently, Xinjiang is made up of 55% of Han Chinese and only 45% of Uyghurs. The total population is 22 million. There's been a long-standing discrimination against the Uyghur people in China. Anyone who's spent some time in China will know that the Uyghurs are known by Han as being thieves, being unscrupulous, untrustworthy. In short, they're an easy scapegoat for the Chinese government. There are numerous terrorist attacks in China every year, and usually they're blamed on the so-called Xinjiang terrorist separatists. So what is the human rights crisis currently taking place? Well, the Chinese government has begun to set up massive re-education camps in Xinjiang. Though really, this is a euphemism. These are actually internment camps, and many people have been sentenced to stay there for decades. What goes on in these camps? Well, usually the inmates are forced to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, where they have propaganda sessions. They're forced to learn the writings of Xi Jinping, the current president. They're forced to sing the national anthem, and any transgression, no matter how minor, can lead to their being sentenced to even longer in the camps. They suffer corporal punishment as well. But according to the Chinese government, this is all about bringing the Uyghurs in line, making them feel more a part of China, reaffirming the role, the supreme role of the Chinese state. But of course, these camps hark back to the worst of the Cultural Revolution in China, the hardest period under Chairman Mao, still hailed by the government as a hero. And the figures are shocking. I mentioned that the population of Xinjiang is 22 million, 45% of which is Uyghur people. Well, according to Human Rights Watch, 800,000 Uyghurs are currently interned. That's almost 10% of the population in a camp. And the most minor of scrapes can get one interned. It can be anything from saying something that apparently goes against the government, or being anti-state, We all know what the situation of freedom of speech is in China, after all. But it doesn't stop there. Once someone has been dragged into one of these camps, their families are also at stake. They can also be persecuted. And I'll finish up with a figure that I think is the most disturbing of all. When Uyghurs travel outside of China, since after all they have Chinese passports and the right to travel, they're not allowed to renew these passports at embassies outside of the country. For instance, if you have a Uyghur Chinese in France and they want to renew their passports at the embassy in Paris, what they're given is a temporary travel document so they can go back to Xinjiang and do their paperwork there, basically exposing them to the risk that they'll go back home only to be thrown into one of these mass camps. It remains to be seen what the future holds for this, but it's not looking rosy by any means. Thank you.